computer. Hello and welcome. Today we're going to go into the first position of thought toward objectivity. I'll be reading this. Oh, Max has entered the room. I'll be reading it and then we're going to discuss it. Afterwards, we're going into the second position, but they'll will probably be in another video. And you, as the viewer, will already know that. So I'm going to start right now. The first position of thought toward objectivity. Spirit has been thought. What spirit is in and for itself has been acknowledged to be known only through thought. The world, what is in its essence, when it is abstracted from external sense perceptions, also came to be contemplated thinkingly. There was in antiquity confidence that thinking could not fall into error once it strode forth for itself and on its own account. On the whole, this was the procedure through all the empirical sciences, even in natural history and the doctrine of nature. Kinds, species, or laws, powers were contemplated in these sciences and were brought together by reflection. The content of thought was supposed to correspond to appearance. This content was to be the essential content of what exists. But what exists upon itself has its inessential side. So I will just say one thing, and that's, he says here, upon itself. Is that different than in itself? Well, in German we say an sich, which would literally translate to upon itself, but in itself it means the same thing. You can translate it either ways for the clarity. Yet what exists is not left in its immediacy, but comes to be grasped in its universality. Thinking is thus present in all the sciences. As innocently as one proceeds today in the empirical sciences, philosophy in antiquity has proceeded just as innocently with its objects. We shall see in section B2 below the nature of what Kant in his critical philosophy called experience. Philosophy in antiquity differentiated itself from the other sciences, from the empirical sciences in particular, only through its objects. The objects of the empirical sciences are finite. Philosophy also had its objects, whether they were found in our consciousness or were apprehended by sense perception. Yet these objects were each to be the whole, they were each to be the same universal, all-encompassing object. The absolute object is God, over against which the world passes as something accidental. Yet the question comes back again as to whether the world, by virtue of its matter, is eternal. Beyond that, the world is space, a complex of infinitely numerous things. The world is only these disparate existing singular things. In philosophy, the world is viewed as the whole and becomes the universal object. Another object of philosophy is the soul. It was obvious to classical metaphysics that the soul was an object of an entirely different order than the world. Such are the objects which philosophy has elected for itself, and through them philosophy has distinguished itself from the other sciences. Now this triad, world, God, and soul, is the same metaphysical triad that, I don't know if he gets from Kant, but Kant also has this particular triad as the metaphysical triad. Philosophical thinking can either be authentic speculative thinking, or it can be a thinking that holds itself within finite determinations, either a thinking of what is true or a thinking of what is finite. In the latter case, it is a thinking that lacks all truth because it is determined by what is other than it itself, because it does not go back into itself, but goes beyond itself to what is other than it. Very interesting. We shall first consider thinking with respect to this second, finite, deficient side. Philosophizing, which has the totality for its object, has comported itself in a finite manner. The objects and thought determinations that the other sciences have are finite, but philosophy is to have totalities for its objects. If the thought determinations of philosophy are not absolute, they fail to correspond to their object. The consideration of infinite objects according to finite thought determinations is the philosophy of the understanding. The understanding insists on finite thought determinations. so that philosophy becomes merely the understanding's view of reason's objects. Classical metaphysics received its complete development prior to the Kantian critical philosophy. The earlier philosophies were merely fragmentary, with much of what is speculative mixed in with the rest. But metaphysics, and Wolff's metaphysics in particular, has developed finite thought determinations. This philosophy has now passed away, but the thinking determined by it is still present. It's a very interesting sentence. Laws, forces are all thought forms, but the question is whether these thought forms are to be taken up in their finitude or in their truth, because truth is infinite. Naive thinking can be true, it can be speculative, but in the classical metaphysics from antiquity on, it has been so uncritically. It has had no consciousness of the thought forms which it has used and by which it has fallen into contradictions, so that it has since been remarked that this is not the way in which we reach the truth. The predicates which are given to objects are thought determinations. From paragraph 33 on, from the following paragraphs on, the thought forms of metaphysics are pointed out. We can leave them aside here. If we wish to go on into them in a more detailed manner, we would have to go into the entirety of metaphysics. The first general branch of metaphysics is ontology, to-on, the metaphysics of what is. The ontological determinations of essence, being, unity, manyness, substance, and the phenomenon on the whole make up the Aristotelian categories. In his metaphysics, Aristotle goes through the same categories, the categories concerning whatever is, a kategorite peri ton onton. The special, more concrete branches of metaphysics have been treated, first of all, the soul, i.e. rational psychology, but merely according to the thought of it, without empirical psychology in which what we know from the sensory experience about the activity of the soul is taught. Spirit is the organization of all our doings. Its activities belongs to it as such. By the soul, one understands rather a thing, ens. We inquire into the seat of the soul. As something bodily, spirit steps into what is spatial. The third branch of metaphysics has treated the world, cosmology, the theory of nature, natural history, and so on. Along with this branch, the determination of the freedom of the soul is also treated. In cosmology, the world has been treated only by abstract thoughts, yet the world can be considered in its truth only as nature, by which the world is nothing abstract, but is rather something actual, an essential being. But if we wish to consider the world, we must take it up through its activities and external expressions. The philosophical approach to the world is the consideration of it in its necessity. What is concrete? A text fragment is unfortunately missing here in the German transcript. Then we have rational theology, which is the fourth branch of metaphysics, reaching as far as the light of reason. Proofs have been given that God exists, and abstract determinations, that is, divine attributes, have likewise been apprehended as belonging to God alone. In paragraph 28 of the 1830 Encyclopedia, it is pointed out that in metaphysical reasoning, our procedure will first be to have a subject of predication. In knowledge, its predicates will then have to be enunciated. It is to be seen which predicates belong to the object which serves as the subject of predication. I'll just reread that. It is to be seen which predicates belong to the object which serves as the subject of predication. Predicates imply universal determinations. It is presupposed here that if we wish to know an object, we must think it. Reflection brings forth thoughts, and the present naive metaphysics presupposes these thoughts. They become the content, the essence of the matter itself. There is as yet no mistrust, no doubt, but instead only sound human conviction. What is deficient in this naive procedure is that, though thought generally contain truth, it is further unanswered question as to how these thoughts are internally determined, how thinking develops in a more exact manner. In this naive procedure, such thought determinations have been taken as valid predicates in isolation from one another, as containing truth in their mutual isolation. For example, is the world finite or is it infinite? One or the other comes to be taken as a predicate that expresses something that is for itself true on its own account. Or to cite another example, we may say the soul is simple. Is a thought such as simplicity a determination which is true for itself on its own account? That is further unanswered. That is the further unanswered question in classical metaphysics. The one or the whole is a true determination taking in this way for itself. It has been taken up in a completely naive fashion. It's referring to Barth. What was looked into here was only whether such predicates belong to the objects rather than whether the thought determinations contained in the predicates were themselves true. That is the first mode of reflection, and on the whole we are right in adopting this mode. It is a question of this or that determination correctly belonging or not belonging to the object. The question is whether a judgment of this kind is correct. Matter is composite, the world is finite, God is a necessary being, and so on. But the further question is whether such predicates are true on their own account. Plato already said that it is necessary to contemplate the objects themselves, and that in doing so one goes beyond the objects in their sensory form. We can cite countless philosophical theories, but nothing is said thereby as to whether the content given in the predicates is in itself true. The external consideration of the correctness of theories is left behind in philosophical consideration of the truth of the content. When this content is considered for itself on its own account, it is considered thinkingly. If I say God is the cause of the world, the truth, i.e., correctness of what I say, will be granted. But in saying it, the true relation of cause and effect is not exhaustively determined. For a cause by itself expresses only a finite and at once untrue relation. Should we speak of what is true in causality, we must leave to the side such untrue relations. Awareness of this is obtained through the science of logic. There is nothing bad in determinations like force. Rather, we simply mean that these determinations belong to the subject of which they are predicated. But once again, we must look into these determinations themselves to see if they are themselves true. And this leads us to a critique of such thought determinations. Everywhere I go, I bring with me my determinations of thought and bring them forward even without being conscious of them. I do so quite instinctively until I'm brought to the point of attending to them. But with that, I come up with a contradiction. In mastering this situation, I thus come inwardly to know these thought determinations as I become fully acquainted with them. Judgments like the paper is white are quite correct, but their predicates lack truth. The thought determinations must be investigated to see if they are true. Such predicates are limited of content. If you want to call in representations to bear witness to the limitations of our predicates, such representations are abundant when we speak, for example, of God or spirit. What we find is that those simple predicates are not adequate to that abundance of representations. If I say, for example, spirit is simple, we have the totally empty determination of simplicity. Simplicity is inactive, lifelessly abstract, as when we say space is simple. We thus find the predicate simple to be inadequate to represent God. That God exists is the very least that can be validly said of him. This sort of predication has contributed to discrediting such naive metaphysics. If we apply to nature abstract predicates such as appear in judgment, nature makes no jumps, but rather advances by degrees, very little is said in comparison with the great abundance of nature itself. Predicates like just, good, to be sure express an affirmation, but there are also limited determinations. God is such and such, but with that what he is not exhausted. Beyond that, is the fact that these predicates contradict one another. If we proceed merely on the basis of God's justice, we proceed against his goodness. Or if we proceed on the basis of his goodness, we proceed against his justice. God is further all-powerful. If I pursue a determination aim merely of my own, I proceed against divine power, since over against divine power, any aim of my own must remain indeterminate. Yet if I say that God in his wisdom has created free beings, I at once say that he has created the real possibility of evil. Here again a contradiction arises. Such predicates at once show themselves to be of limited content. The Orientals, for example the Hindus, give their God infinitely many names, each expressing a particular determination or relation to the world. But infinitely many is once again something inexistent. These predicates belong to but one subject. They stand in community only through that subject, which is their bond. Beyond their respective determinations, they coincide in this subject. If I say of God, he is eternal, good, wise, these three determinations are not connected with one another by themselves. Were they to be connected in this way, his goodness would have to inhere his justice and so forth. But these are accidental predicates of that subject. By contrast, when we say of a human being that he or she has bowels, has nerves, or has muscles, we have the feeling of speaking of one and the same thing in its function and activity. These predicates are not so very much merely side by side as to have their connection only in the subject of which they are predicated. Rather, they are directly connected with one another. The one cannot be without the other, since each is the same total living being. They are connected with one another among themselves. But in the case of non-organic things, we see an external relation of one thing to another. Gold has different properties, and in the most minute particle of gold, these properties remain the same. It has its properties, and the properties in this set are found over and over again side by side in different particles of gold. No matter how small the particle of gold, the set of inseparable properties remain ever present. Yet we have no insight into any necessity of their inseparability. We merely have faith in it. But when we also say of spirit that it is willing and that it is also thinking, the properties of spirit are similarly enumerated side by side like those of gold. Such are the objects of special metaphysics. The world, the soul, and God, each a totality. Spirit too is a totality within itself, a whole which is at once an infinite realm. These are the objects of reason. The representations we have of them lay the foundation in this naive metaphysics. Such representations are the standard by which we judge whether the predicates apply or not. The representations of God and of the soul are merely presupposed. A representation is something subjective. The present age has a different representation of God, as also of justice, from that of any prior age. But it should be spelled out just what justice by its thought determination is, just what God is, and so on. Often etymology can be called into service. That's a very good point. I like this. We often say that all human beings have one representation of God or justice, but this does not prevent anybody from having another representation. Thus, all science has a contingent presupposition, just as the geometer begins by postulating this contingent representation of a point or a line. You see how far I still have to go? I'm almost done. Okay. The wait, what's I? Oh yes, these representations of metaphysical objects at once appear to afford us a firm grasp. God, spirit, and the world are something determinately fixed within me by a particular representation. We could not philosophize if we did not have as a foundation such a fixed representation. But the question is whether any such representation has itself a fixed foundation. This supposition comes into question as soon as we ask, what is God? We give predicates to God. and our representation of God at first receives a fixed determination through this predication. But the nature of the objects of metaphysics is only now to be spelled out. When I ask, what is God? Or what is spirit? The very sense of the question is that the given representation is not enough for me, that I am not satisfied by it, no matter what it is. No matter what is, its thought determination must first be indicated to me. In judgment, it is not until the predicate arrives that the nature of the subject is spelled out. If I say God is eternal, God is omnipotent, my representation of God is extended beyond what is given in the subject. Going beyond merely what is given in the subject, I contradict what I first presupposed in invoking the subject. The representation contained in the subject does not suffice for me, and so I carry it out further. It is not until the predicate arrives that we acquire knowledge of the subject from which we began. The absolute is often understood as merely abstract, but what the absolute is, or what God is, comes to be expressed through thoughts and their further determination. So it comes to be said in the science of logic that God is being, and then further on that he is essence, that he is self-concept, that he is the idea. This is the form which we give to our logic. We may thus make God into the subject, but the subject is what God is only if we posit in the predicates, if what we posit in the predicates comes to be the case. That is the matter before us, and whether it is called God or the absolute is of no consequence. By its subject-predicate form, judgment is one-sided and hence false. If I say God is eternal, I succeed in getting at something, but eternal fails to express the nature of God, and to that extent my statement does not get it right. God is an entirely different sort of concrete being from what is expressed by any such limited predicate. In philosophizing, we have to put all imaginative representation to the side. Representations constitute something fixed in our consciousness. If we were to try to rid ourselves of all fixed representation and not just to put them to the side, we would nonetheless again have a representation, namely the representation of finding ourselves floating atop something quite bottomless. Classical metaphysics became dogmatic. Skepticism has set itself over against such dogmatism. Skepticism has considered the representations of our ordinary consciousness, of our ordinary assertions, as it has likewise considered assertions which refer to metaphysical objects. Skepticism attacks all such assertions and shows them each to contain a contradiction. Dogmatism philosophizes by exhibiting a statement, Satz, that immediately licenses the opposite statement. The world is infinite, the world is finite, are examples. Dogmatism pronounces one of the two opposed statements to be true. Stoicism, for example, has pronounced the truth to be thought, where its opposite is what is sensory. The metaphysical dogmatism, opposite to Stoicism, has thus said that the principle behind every human disposition and action is sensation. Dogmatism asserts that one of the two statements is true. One is true, the other is false. Either the principle of all truth is thinking or it is sensation. The two principles are different, and either the one or the other is valid. It is around such opposed metaphysical dogmas that all controversy in philosophy has turned. The supposition of the understanding, Verstand, is that if the one is true, the other is false. That is the finite, contradictory faith. It's faith of the understanding. For it has been found that both sameness can be proven, and with such proofs consciousness has found itself in contradiction. This contradiction has called forth mistrust and doubt about thinking, and a disavowal of metaphysics generally. This disavowal lies at the basis of the second position of thought in relation to objectivity. For such abstract predicates as thought and sensation do not correspond to the concrete content of that living totality. Those predicates are dead, purely simple, and empty of all self-movement. Spirit, however, is within itself living self-movement, while the rigidity of all such abstractions resists such movement. That was beautiful. Any thoughts? I'm tired of talking.
Wow, that is incredible. Yeah. No, this is
He keeps doing it, eh?
this he keeps doing it, man. He keeps doing it.
I really love how it's so
Can you
down
just
to
give me,
earth,
can
especially
you
if
just
you
give
go
me
through the phenomenology, you know?
can you give me a background of how it's led to this moment, Dimitri?
Yeah, so we've read the general concept of our of the matter, which we're interested in. And Hegel has basically presented us with some, I would say, to put it simply, thought experiments and logical exercises to give a general outline of what he's going to do. And now he's giving us the historical, the philosophical history, like wherein he, against which, okay, basically he goes into the three positions of thought, which start with the ancients: dogmatism, skepticism, stoicism. In the second position, he's going into the event of Immanuel Kant, which of course drastically changes the history of philosophy. In the third position, he talks about this mathematician Jacobi, which returns to the first dogmatic position, but he says this third position is not even innocent anymore, because you have to realize that Kant happened. And when Kant happened, you have to go through Kant and you can't just ignore him. And then we go into his own division of the logic with being, essence, and the idea. So that's, yeah.
By going through this historically, what paradigm is Hegel trying to build? What is he taking from them? What is he leaving out so far?
Well, yeah, if someone else wants to talk, please. But I think that he starts out with with saying, okay, philosophy, we're thinking, you know, and we have this in philosophy, we have this presupposition that we can think something. Nietzsche says the same way, and Nietzsche even critiques it. But Hegel basically, I believe what Hegel does, and Barth calls meta philosophy, is that he tries to take that to the end. Like, okay, what if we take this presupposition of philosophy that you can think something and like go fully through with it? So then we have the problem of representation, or what he calls picture thought. So, you know, like I can have, yeah, when I'm hungry, I'm thinking of cake or beef, you know? But he says, or like I can even have a representation of God. But when you, Max, would ask me, okay, but what is God? Suddenly I don't know how to say what he is. So that means the picture thought or the representation of God is not enough, which means that's where contemplation and philosophy come in. Yeah, Jason or Quinn, if you have anything to say on this, like this is really
Yeah, I
something
mean,
to zoom in on.
yeah, I mean, it's nice how it's nice how he kind of walks us through this process and this kind of the naive outlook, how it, sort of presupposes these kind of static self-existent predicates. So it's, it says some sort of, God is simplicity or God is infinite or all of these sorts of things. And then, the process of self-reflection brings into question the very, sort of predicates that are posited. Okay, well then what is this, determination of infinite? How is this juxtaposed to the finite? And I think this is God, obviously, is a concept that you quickly encounter the contradictions and the paradoxes of positing, because you say, okay, God is an infinite being, but in the very act of positing that, I've thereby created a finite determination, right? And so you sort of encounter the tension that's kind of present at the heart of this naive relationship to representation.
I would just add to that very quickly, like why is this a finite? Like let's zoom in as most as we can. Why
Yeah.
is saying God is infinite a finite determination? You're saying God is infinite. Well, it's finite because I can also say God is omnipotent, which means that in saying God is infinite, by saying afterwards God is omnipotent, I have not said enough by saying God is infinite. You know, because these are also externally related, and you can't derive either from the other, right? He says that you have the good, just, omnipotent, but the fact that he's just doesn't mean that he's good. So there's this problem that you can enumerate all of the predicates, but Hegel's like, okay, hold on, let's stop like enumerating them all. Let's just see if the predicate is true on its own accord. And that's, I would say, that where the strain of negation comes in, because if you say, he gives the example, right? Like if you say the God is infinite, or like the world is infinite, you can say, okay, the world is finite. That's the first thing that comes to your mind. So we have this being nothing dialectic going on already, something like this.
You can already see, you can already see the kind of the logic at play here in its infancy, right? Because as soon as you posit something like God is infinite, you then have to look at, okay, well, what is infinite? How are you defining infinity? And then you realize that, okay, this is defined in opposition to some other determination, in this case, finite, right? So then you have sort of this, this problem of how representations necessitate their opposite in order to gain any kind of meaning from which we can then sort of comprehend and make any sense of. And I just think it's something like God is, it's such a quick way to encounter this problem, because it is that concept that is supposed to sort of kind of evade this problem in some ways, or it is the concept that is beyond all finite conceptualization, and so you encounter the problem thinking, or the thinking.
Guys,
the
miss
absolute
so
object,
many.
right?
Yeah, God, if I like, I miss a lot. I'm so sorry, but I hate it so much. But what I remember was that God is in the ancient world considered as an absolute object, as you said, over and against the world. And yeah, that's I think I the way, like, I obviously miss a lot, so maybe this was talked about before, but I sense like a lot of, as you said, Quinn, like tensions between the concepts, the triad in the ancient world of soul, world, God, and then you look at the metaphysics of the ancient world, where we have ontology, rational psychology, cosmology, but then it's added another thing, rational theology, and that's done to basically prove God, right? You need to prove God. And I think this addition, this fourth addition, I don't know, it doesn't have to be symmetrical, I guess, but I feel like it has to do with the tension between the soul corresponding to like rational psychology and God corresponding to ontology. And for you to connect what's missing in the understanding of God, because God is over and against the world, you need this rational theology. You need to like prove God's existence, because I don't know. Sorry, lost my train of thought. But I do feel, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, Hegel says that it doesn't really matter where where we start or where we're headed.
I guess I missed that. Yeah.
What matters is the form. And the form, so the first objectivity, first stance towards objective that thought has, Hegel says we have the understanding as a faculty, which the reason goes beyond to be able to think infinity. And then he also says there is dogmatism, which uses the understanding in this naive way that lacks reflection. Then we have a reaction to that, which is skepticism. And I think it would be wise not to say, oh, we already know what skepticism is, because he explains it in a certain way. And he also says, what was it? Yeah, stoicism. So where stoicism would say that it's about the thoughts are true, not the senses, whereas the dogmatists say no. And we also say, what Plato does is that he says, no, it's not about the sense objects. We have to think their objects in their universality. So there is this step already in the ancient position towards thought.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's fascinating, right? And with the you can see how there's these different, like the problem of duality comes up when you have, in the case of Stoic philosophy, you have like the pure idea, these notions of rationality, the good, the true, and sort of pure thought becomes set up in opposition to the sensory world, and thought becomes the thing that's most true. So you have this duality that's created, this distinction that's created, and then one is sort of prioritized as being more ontologically real in some ways, or important in some ways. So one is prioritized against the other.
What do you think about skepticism? What does Hegel mean with it? Here, in like specifically here.
Well, we haven't gotten to it yet, but I think he intimates it here. He says that this naive position doesn't have any doubt or mistrust within it. And so I think that's really the impulse of skepticism, is once you start encountering these paradoxes of representation and these paradoxes of that you encounter in the faculty of understanding, you then sort of the immediate impulse is to doubt everything, is to really sort of so almost like feel a shame about the faculty of understanding, and constantly try and actively undermine its own positing, kind of, because you've encountered the failure of the correspondence and the paradox of determination.
Right. I think actually in the second position of thought towards objectivity, he's going to go into that, but there is like a crucial difference between what he calls the ancient skeptics and the modern skeptics.
Okay.
And he says Hume is something like this.
Yeah, there was one section that really stuck out to me. And I mean, and he says that like we have to start with a kind of naive realism here. You have to start with these kind of fixed representations. They allow you to move in the world. You're kind of inculcated into a whole socially extended world of fixed representations, and this allows you to operate and make sense of reality. And so they give you a firm grasp. So you need this first, like this first step is unavoidable.
It's also, Hegel praises Aristotle for it in the preface of the Phenomenology of Spirit, for his speculative depth. That's literally what he says.
Yeah.
This is because, so how does Aristotle write so much? Well, I don't actually know if actually the guy Aristotle wrote it himself, because of course so many years have gone by since then, but the idea was that if, like he explains this in the first few pages, 45, 46, that if you get a thing and you just stay thinking with it and you think it through, then you will automatically arrive at the truth of it. That's what Hegel says about this ancient faculty of the understanding, like how it was utilized in philosophy. Now we know that's not true anymore. There's something else going on, and yeah, it's very tricky, to say the least.
So did you guys finish the section on the ancients, or when did you stop? I miss so much.
We stopped at the we're about to go to the second position, but I feel like this quote here, I think, intimate, like this quote I really liked here. This is on page 25. He says, God is an entirely different sort of concrete being from what is expressed by any such limited predicate. In philosophizing, we have to put all imaginative representation to the side. Representations constitute something fixed in our consciousness. If we were to try to rid ourselves of all fixed representations and not just put them to the side, so he's making this subtle distinction between ridding ourselves of representation and sort of placing them to the side, we would nonetheless again have a representation, namely the representation of finding ourselves floating atop something quite bottomless. So I think this kind of intimates the mode of kind of ancient skepticism, which it wants to just do, it finds fixed representations to be fallacious, and so it's mistrustful of them, and so it wants to just do away with them, but this finds itself, the irony is it finds itself in yet another representation, just a kind of empty representations, the representation of no representation, which I just quite like that.
Yeah, I really love how it's because Zizek says that, we can't, absolute knowing is the inability to overcome the transcendental circle. And you can kind of get this from this sentence, and it's not that we get rid of picture thought, because if we do that, we just go psychotic, basically. But we put them to the side, and Hegel is I think he's like, he has practiced a lot with doing that, and that's why he thinks in such a crazy way. Because it's very attractive, I think, because with picture thought, we get like bad infinities, I would say, like one way
and the faculty of
but that's that's the thing, the faculty of the understanding can conceptualize infinity, but it is a bad infinity. It can't think through infinity, and the bad infinity, the way I see it, is like a spiral into nothingness. It's like if I would describe God in infinitely
you describe that as the bad infinity?
Yeah.
A spiral into nothingness?
Well, it's like, it's basically, if I would say, Jason is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like all these particular things. And like, it's not going on anywhere, like, that the next thing I'm going to say is going to be as boring as the previous thing I'm going to say.
Would you say this is connected to the ancients' view that the world is space? Because that's in this passage somewhere, it says that the world is space, and the world is a universal object, and the soul is different from the world. So this is just a pure differentiation. No mediation. There's no mediation between world and soul. It's just two different. Would you say that that's a form of like a bad infinity? It's just a negation of the world.
I wouldn't. Well, it's hard to say,
I
man.
would also say
so.
that the understanding falls into bad infinities. I think it also falls into these sort of dualisms, and I think that would be an example of this kind of dualism, right? And he's giving more of them. It posits one thing in opposition to another thing, and then there's no sort of relationship of mediation established, and so there you get this alienation, where the soul is alienated from the world, or the world is alienated from the soul, and you find yourself in these
I think bad infinity, that's something to meditate on for a long time, because I do think, it's basically the beyond of the faculty of the understanding.
I think
understood from within the understanding, like an attempt at it. Because that's the thing, the crucial thing is the first time we try to think infinity, it is bad infinity. And we only get the true infinity because we are going through thinking the bad infinity. That's how Hegel actually
you have to traverse the bad infinity.
Yeah.
So I think I found it, and I think this is a kind of example of bad infinity. It's on page 46. Beyond that, okay, I'll start from the previous sentence. Yet the question comes back again as to whether the world, by virtue of its matter, is eternal. Beyond that, the world is space, a complex of infinitely numerous things. So that's, to me that kind of describes this. Yeah.
Would you say it's sort of like like an endless multiplicity?
Right, so
multiplicity of it's like, and I think you encounter that when you start making determinations. You make one determination, but then you can make another determination, and then so there's and suddenly, as soon as you start positing any kind of determinations, a sort of
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
it unfolds infinitely from itself. Yeah.
It's just a mere negation of this is not that, it's not that, it's not that, it's not that. You know, there's no, you can never come to something like a lack. You know, a lack is not a thing that you can account for through just negation, right? It's kind of a negation of, I don't know, maybe we're jumping way too
Yeah,
ahead.
well, I mean, you can say,
Yeah.
yeah, an absence, a lack, something missing, you know,
I mean,
The act of
essential.
full
I wonder if this is possible,
Yeah,
honestly.
I
Like,
think it is, man.
oh yeah,
I
Well,
think
I mean, in the act, like
Hmm.
in that movement of endlessly positing determinations, you are kind of trying to gloss over a kind of lag. There's a
Right.
negativity between each determination.
Right.
And so you go
I think
about
so.
endlessly trying to posit different determinations, but what's missing is this kind of
Yeah.
self-referential
What's missing?
negativity
What's
that's
missing is
devoid the
what's missing.
subject. That,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
What's missing is
exactly,
what's missing.
exactly.
Exactly. That's to me that's the negation of the negation.
Yes, that is also the true infinity is conceptualized as
Right.
negation of negation. That's literally,
Right.
yeah. That's the interesting thing about Hegel, you know, it's like if you really start
But
thinking about
we
logic,
are
it seems
jumping way ahead
it's
here.
yeah, we are jumping way up, but it's like an objective logic, really.
Right. Right.
How
Anyway,
do you this
yeah,
So
someone.
how do
yeah,
you
yeah,
think this logic
Well,
differs? Because it seems that Hegel's logic, is he doing something very similar to Aristotle in his logic? And is he doing, like, I mean, is he doing logic? I mean, or is he doing something more?
he's doing logic. He's doing the science of logic. Aristotle, you were just leaving when I said it, but Hegel praises Aristotle for his speculative depth. But the thing with Aristotle is that he uses the faculty of the understanding. So he has written all these books. You can learn a lot about like the multiplicitous nature of the world. You know, everything you can basically, you know, see. Like Aristotle even talks about elephants and stuff like this, and like animals, and he like in philosophy of nature. But
what
the problem
Well,
with
because
Aristotle is
let
that
me,
it's missing a self-reflection
that's what I'm saying. So, because
because
I'm
are
trying to
these
get,
determinations themselves true? That's the
I
question.
have I haven't been here as much as you guys, so I've missed a lot, and I'm just trying to orientate myself.
I
So
miss so much,
if
dude.
if I think of logic, like I did logic, and you're talking about proposition, you're talking about decision trees, truth tables developed by Wittgenstein, and a lot of it is, sort of propositional. Um, if
E not
if then,
P.
all of that stuff. But what is very interesting in listening to Hegel's logic, from the small amount that I did, is that in a sense it reminds me of intentionality, which was developed by Franz Brentano and was taken up by Husserl, which is this sort of aboutness. So it's not just the proposition, but it's how consciousness and self-consciousness thinks about the proposition. And then also, Russell's theory of reference. So when I speak of something like, the Harry Potter, what am I referring to? Am I referring to something that is true, but it's a fictional character? And what Russell develops is a sort of, what you're saying when you say Harry Potter is true, you're not actually just, your language is deceiving you. What's really going on is a massively complex logical structure in that language. So is this aboutness and referent, like, I mean, when Hegel's talking about all of this, the determinate negations and God, he seems to be questioning, okay, we have these logical propositions that are developed in the mind, and it's referring to something, but how is the mind thinking about what it's referring to, and what actually is it referring to? Is this
But
what
also
Hegel talking about in this?
but also there's the problem of like, what is this aboutness shit about. Like
what is about
what is it? Ontologically, right?
Can I read a Hegel quote? He says, philosophical thinking can either be authentic speculative thinking, or it can be thinking that holds itself within finite determinations. Either a thinking that holds either a thinking of what is true, or a thinking of what is finite. Now again, finite is endlich. So a thinking that is finite is a thinking that will come to an end, or a thinking that will not come to an end, which is, true thinking, because that is the truth is infinite in that sense. Because if the truth will come to an end, it's not the truth, because the truth cannot lose anything by being written down, like he says in the phenomenon.
Yeah, and so there's like the speculative move is kind of a disembedding from these propositions, I think, which then invites the kind of things you're saying, Max. Then suddenly once consciousness has disembedded itself from a kind of presupposed certainty of propositions, it then has these questions of aboutness. How is the subject, I guess, towards these propositions or towards the object? Then you have the problem of reference is this thing referring to some external thing out there. Then you have the problem of language, where as soon as you, like what Hegel says, you say, okay, God is X or something is X, you then have to define what X is, and then in order to define what X is, you have to pull in, if we're going from Derrida, you have to pull in then the entire dictionary with you. You have to define every single term in order to even understand one thing. So you have the problem of deferred meaning, that you have no final kind of referent on which to grasp. So all of these things, I think, all of these questions kind of emerge with this speculative move as this naive subject disembeds itself from these propositions.
I would also add that what Hegel is doing, insofar as logic is concerned, is science of truth, right? So, but truth, as has been said before, right? It cannot. What is it again? It cannot be reduced by being written down. There is something irreducible about truth and cognition and consciousness. They seem to be able. They seem to be like highly interconnected at the very least, if you want to use that kind of language, you can. So that is to me different from like the Aristotelian truth, where it hinges on predication, right? It hinges on the predicates. It's a kind of algorithm.
Yes, and Hegel says that the problem with this fact that there is no mistrust yet, no doubt about the sound human conviction of the faculty of the understanding is in this ancient way of dogmatist thinking, is that the valid predicates have been taken as in isolation from another, containing truth in their mutual isolation. For example, is the world finite or is it infinite? One or the other comes to be taken as a predicate that expresses something that is for itself true in its own account. Or to cite another example, we may say the soul is simple. Is a thought such as simplicity as a determination which is true for itself on its own account? We're already, when we're saying the soul is simple, we're already saying there is such a thing as simple, and this is a true category. I can apply it to this subject of the predicate. But what is this predicate for itself, and is it true in that sense? And that's where explication comes in. I really love, like I've been thinking about recently, the difference between explanation and explication. Of course, we have the Daniel Gardner's address. You address the subject instead of explain it away by mere substance. But I think what Hegel does in the Phenomenology of Spirit and in his books is that he doesn't explain to you what he means, but he explicates the logical process to you. And that's beautiful, I think. That's how you see the determinations, not in their finite isolation, but their mutual necessary relation, which is, going beyond this first position of thought. And I think that's what Kant critiques, because you will always end up with antinomies if you think in that way. We end up in paradoxes and contradictions all the time, so therefore, to critique pure reason, according to Kant.
So Kant is taking Aristotle's categories and he's saying, okay, that's fine. We have these categories in our mind. They give us the condition for the possibility of experience. And Hegel is analyzing these categories in and of themselves, only these categories, or is he doing more?
Now, it's just an example. So when he's saying the soul is simple, but what is the simplicity itself? It's only an example to express something that, okay, we're having this form where we're saying A is X. Subject is predicate. You know, God is being. But what is being? And this is where he does the science of logic. And Hegel is very Aristotelian in his style, actually. But there's a certain speculative form of thinking that Hegel really emphasizes we should do. So he says, actually, it doesn't really matter where we start or what the end point is. What matters is the form in which we think it. And this is also beautiful when it comes down to explanation. For example, you know, I really try to implement this in my own philosophical discussions, for example, with Barth, you know, like I can critique him with my own bright ideas and write, no, I think this of Hegel and this is my phallus. But I can also ask one simple question, which kind of inverts his understanding. And this is a formal gesture that I think Hegel teaches us to do this. That's why you can read all the big Hegel books, but if you think, oh, it's 700 hours of Hegel, I have all these categories like the Aristotelian fortress in my mind. No, you're not getting what Hegel is getting at. It's the form in which you think something. So you can have, it's very applicable.
Okay, so you're saying in Hegel's speculative aspect,
Wait, just one thing. I would say Jason put this in a very nice way. Hegel makes it possible for us to talk with each other.
But what I'm saying is there's an element of simplicity here in this, that we have all of these complex aspects within the Hegelian system, but there's a you know, what Cadell has said in regard to there's a simplicity also. So what is this simplicity that you're pointing at in this aspect?
We've had a long conversation about simplicity a long time ago, right? I don't know. I don't remember anymore what the context was.
Yeah, it's
I think simplicity. I mean, I'm so off today, guys. I'm so sorry. Not my best performance. But I think simplicity is related to like the self concept. When a thing is that when a thing is one-sided, you know, when a thing is I don't know, Dimitri. How you seem to remember what I'm
I know what you
saying.
mean,
Yeah.
and it is like there is a relationship between what Daniel Gardner calls bothness, simplicity, and one-sided thinking. Because
Right.
I perhaps we can say it like this: the form in the simple self-othering of the concept of the notion can deceive us into thinking in a one-sided way. Or like we are the agents of this self-deception, of course, but I think I think that one-sided is something that can be a result of
But it's also a kind of like
misunderstanding simplicity.
path of least resistance as well. You know, like it's like I guess everything relates back to the self. So if you have like a thing, if you have a problem or something, and then you see how aspects of it relate to you, those aspects are simple. You know, that's the way I think about it. Like it leads to you. That's the sidedness of it. That's, I don't know.
Yeah,
So basically the simplicity comes when a paradox or a contradiction or a dualism arises.
I would say it like this. You know, you said Harry Potter. What do you say like Harry Potter?
Harry Potter, a fictional character.
Yeah, Harry Potter is a fictional character. Okay, so we have the subject, Harry Potter is a fictional character. It's a very nice example. And then you said, but there's this complex structure behind, you know, my conceptualization of Harry Potter. And I think Hegel would say this is external cognition, because the determination itself, Harry Potter is a fictional character, if it's taken for what it is and I don't have this complex structure, it's just simple. And Hegel says that's actually the only thing that it is, because when you say I have this complex structure, for me, I don't know what you mean by that. You know, for me, it's abstract. So there is a simplicity
yeah.
in this determination itself. Like
I feel
it's
like we
just
could make a distinction between a kind of naive simplicity here, and then a simplicity that has, you know, worked through the skepticism and the doubt and the mistrust, which I would probably articulate as a return to a kind of simple living self movement. Like so, but which is only discovered through that process of you disembedding from the naive simplicity. You suddenly, the conceptual fortress becomes present, and then you have to orient with that. But it's this movement of you know, it's this movement of positing and then working through that the subject communes with that process. And it seems that, you know, something like a state of absolute knowing is a kind of return to a simplicity that was present at the beginning, but only in a naive form. And it works through all of these different stages to return to a kind of living, I don't know, this kind of communion with its own movement
Right.
that is this very simple self relation.
So that's what I said. It's a self concept. You know, simplicity is whatever self concept there is.
It's also something you, to put it very simple, in the technical way, you can only have one thought at a time. You can express only one thought at a time. That is quite simple, you know. That is literally, I think that's literally what Hegel means by simplicity. You know, there's this, I can't just bombard you with all my complexity, and you can't really derive the logic of the self concept from that.
So would you say that simplicity is like thought itself, when you're able to see that a thing is thought? You know, that's the simplicity of it.
Yeah, I think, you know, this, I think simplicity, that's also what has three moments, you know, like you can say, you know, A is A, or like A is not A, or like, A is B. Like those are all simple determinations. And
how about
the thing with simplicity is this, is that you can actually do something radical with simplicity, and that is that you can equate thought with being. You can say thought is being, or spirit is a bone. And this is a kind of speculative moment that you can do with simplicity that Hegel brings us to, but you don't get if you start occupying yourself with all kinds of external complexities, like, you know, external cognizing different variables.
how about in relation to mediation and immediacy, right? The immediate is not simple, but the mediated is simple because it is in thought, right? The action of thinking itself is the mediation.
Yeah.
You know, like an object before you is immediate, right? And therefore it's not simple, because there's you, and then there's the object, and then there's, I don't know, whatever, you know.
Well, the immediacy is
yeah.
Immediacy is mediated.
No, but mediation. No, I know, of course is, but it doesn't appear that way to you, right?
Abstract mediation like this.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's would you say it's Hegel does talk about it, you know, somewhere.
This is a can of worm you've opened, Max. This is tough.
Yeah, because
but I mean, but this sounds like sense certainty. If you go back to the phenomenology, he talks about the particular, but actually it's a universal. So, you know, there might be something within this example that you're giving in sense certainty in the phenomenology.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember anymore, but we really I remember us having a pretty in-depth discussion of like what is the simplicity is.
Yeah,
But it is, the problem is I don't think it's to be contrasted with like complexity. That's
yeah,
that's the real nugget of it, right? We're not
I don't know. It helps
I
me.
think oftentimes the complexity is trying to cover up a kind of simple negativity.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Back to Cattell's paper, I think it speaks to that. But
Right.
yeah.
So how do you, from reading the lectures of logic so far, how do you see it as an evolution, or is it an evolution on the phenomenology?
It's the way Hegel says it is that Hegel basically, Cadell repeats Hegel here verbatim. First, you have to read the phenomenology to go through the stages of consciousness to get absolute knowing. And when you're not constipated with all these bright ideas anymore, then we can basically derive the question, what is God? Which starts with the determination, God is being. Okay, what is being? And then we go on.
Yeah. But I see parallels to the phenomenology, but I really caution making like a connection between, like, I feel like this is an entirely different document, but it is that I do see the parallel between the introduction to the lectures and the introduction to the phenomenology. There's a lot of similarities. They actually help each other, I think.
The style feels more akin to the
Style, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's way more matured, for sure.
Yeah. Are we reading more or
I'm
what,
down.
guys? Because I'm so disappointed. I missed the entire fucking
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Please
I'm
read it on your own.
disappointed
It's
that
so
you're
good.
Yeah, I will.
This
You
is
need
like,
to do better, man. Yeah.
So sad.
let me see how I'll just read until let me just stop.
Yeah,
Thanks
I know
for
it's
watching.